Coogs House. The Houston Cougars had the most NFL draft picks for any Houston Cougar team since 1997, and one lucky Cougar doesn't even have to move.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater can't step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way, the latest on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome back to the YouTube channel, and it is good to see you again. Remember, we're giving away every 250 subscribers, and at 1250, which we're rapidly approaching. I think we're at 11:30 something right now. Going one of these Locked On hats I got going with the Cougar paw on the front, the Locked On the side. Yeah, you got that right, all that kind of stuff. So make sure you subscribe down below to get us there, and to be entered in, make sure you're commenting and liking on the video. If after talking Houston Cougars landing in the NFL, you are looking for something else to talk about, well, why don't you tell us? Okay, this is my hot take question of the day. Which came first, orange the color or orange the fruit? Yeah, it's a thinker. Yeah. All right. So today's episode's got a couple things. One, we're going to talk about the NFL draft across the entire episode, but the first section is going to be all about. First segment is going to be about Tank Dell. Second segment is going to be about Clayton Tune, because those are the two guys that had some of the most impactful draft positions going in the third and fifth round, respectively. And then we're going to wrap up with talking about where the rest of the Cougs landed, because this is, with four NFL draft picks, the most NFL draft picks the Houston Cougars have had since 1997. They had the third highest of any school in the state of Texas drafted this year. The University of Texas at Austin had 5, and TCU had, I think, double digits, something like that, after their college football playoff type season. So Houston looks like they had a very strong weekend. I'm going to talk about where the guys landed. Number of other guys also got signed already as undrafted free agents. But first, we have to talk about Tank Dell, because it was kind of rumored and something people talked about wanting to happen in the build-up to the process. But Tank Dell does get to stay home. He was drafted number 69th overall by the Houston Texans in the third round. And frankly, it's worth pointing out, third-round draft picks typically have some staying power in the NFL, especially at these more skill-type positions like slot receivers and running backs, because that's a spot where you can come in as an athlete and they can test you, improve you in a couple different ways. And once you've worked through quarterbacks and left tackles and pass rushers, you're kind of getting to the rest of the positions in your draft at the time you get to the third round. I have to say that I love Houston as a landing spot for Tank, not just because it is staying home in a lot of ways. I remember this is a guy that didn't work out going to FIU out of college, had to do the junior college thing for a little bit before finally landing in Houston as a Cougar and finding his home here. Really great story along the way there. And then that he gets to stay home playing for the Houston Texans is a great story for the kid. Also, it's a great landing spot because the Houston Texans did a rookie quarterback in the first round, in C.J. Stroud. And I have to imagine, we're going to talk about their receiving room in a second, but this young receiving room around Stroud is all going to get to grow up together, and Tank Dell could be a big part of that. The other thing is, for young quarterbacks, that slot receiver and tight end spot kind of becomes your safety net, right? They signed Dalton Schultz in the offseason, bringing in Tank Dell. Those are kind of becoming the safety nets for this young quarterback in this offense. The receiver room is also very favorable to him. So you've got Nico Collins, John Metchie III, and Robert Woods to be my slotted 3 starters. And we'll talk through why that actually works out well for Tank in a second. But one by one, Nico Collins is a third-year guy, drafted in 2021. He's an outside receiver. It's not directly competing with Tank. He has started each season he's been in Houston. He has less than 40 catches in each season. He's kind of been the backside of most concepts, not a traditional lead receiver by any stretch, but an outside receiver, right? So not necessarily a competition guy for Tank unless you're really messing with your lineups, mixing up your lineups. John Metchie III, if that name sounds familiar, but where did that come from? Remember, he was drafted in the second round for the Houston Texans last season in Alabama. Before that, he did lead them in catches and receiving touchdowns and stuff like that as a junior. Remember, he had the big crane kick touchdown celebrations. However, before last season, he missed the entire season because he was diagnosed just before last season with leukemia. Now, it does sound like it was the most treatable version of leukemia. I'm history teacher, not a doctor, but that's what all reports indicate. And he did spend the 2022 season recovering and working on himself. January, they act like progress was great. He may be around for OTA kind of stuff this offseason. March reports are all positive. And that's another outside receiver, more like play side type of guy. And that's an impact player they drafted at an outside wide receiver last season. The big offseason signing in the receiver room, though, was Robert Woods in this offseason. So you got hopefully getting Michi healthy. Nico Collins, the backside guy. Woods is directly in competition with Tank Dell at the slot receiver position. You remember Robert Woods was a veteran guy, I guess, originally drafted in Buffalo. I kind of forgot he was drafted in Buffalo until I was looking stuff up for this. But his peak of his career was playing for the LA Rams. He was on the roster but hurt with an ACL injury when they won the Super Bowl. But before that, working with Jared Goff, he was like the check down security blanket for Goff in a lot of ways that I think Tank Dell will be for this offense. He got involved in reverses in the running game. He got involved in screen passes, got involved in deep slants and posts. And it was his speed, Robert Woods, that set him apart. And now Robert Woods is a 31-year-old veteran. His father played a season for the Houston Oilers. It's like a homecoming of sorts there if you want to go down that path. But this is going to be a lot more about what can Tank Dell take in terms of wisdom, habits, growth, etc., from Robert Woods. Robert Woods has seen this done and done this at the most elite level in the NFL. And bringing in a guy like Tank Dell to play under him is great for Tank, our Houston Cougar, because he gets to learn from and see how it's done day in, day out from the best. And if I'm being selfish about this, I don't know how many great snaps of football Robert Woods has left. He had a great career. I don't mean to say that we're rushing him out the door or anything like that. I want him to stick around and teach Tank things. However, selfishly for Tank, I don't know if Robert Woods can play every snap. And they played the same position, and they played in a way that I would imagine if Tank's game translates to the NFL like it should, you see played very, very similarly. And so, well, Robert Woods is undersized, but not quite as undersized as Tank is. They both rely on speed. They both get the ball in their hands and do a bunch of fun, funky stuff with once they get the ball in space. Those kinds of things, I think, will translate a lot. And Tank can step in and start doing that to help Robert Woods not have to play every snap of every game very, very early, right? That's a great yin and yang for the two, and I really, really like where that's going. The other thing about this is that I love the offensive coordinator in Houston for a Tank Dell fit. So Bobby Slowick is a new offensive coordinator, just, I believe, 35 years old. Just 35 years old. Will be 35 all of next season. So young guy. Was a video coordinator assistant for Mike Shanahan in the that same staff that had McVay and Shanahan, all those Mike McDaniels, all those guys in Washington, right? Like the RG3 Washington era, right? And then Slowick took a brief stint to work for Pro Football Focus, right? Because they hire former coaches to work in the analytics department before working for Kyle Shanahan, same tree, in San Francisco. So worked for both dad Mike and son Kyle. Once LaFleur left that Kyle Shanahan system, then they promoted Bobby Slowick to be the pass game coordinator. So all the stuff you saw, whether it was Trey Lance or Jimmy Garoppolo or all of those kinds of things you saw doing with Deebo Samuels and stuff like that in those slot funky type positions, that was all Slowick as the OC or the pass game coordinator, right? And so pass game coordinator, I guess, because they had a more Shanahan was calling the plays, so whatever. But so DeMeco Ryans brings that with him to Houston and sets this up for Tank Dell to come in as the slot receiver and can do all those funky things with his speed. Now, I'm not going to lie, John Michi and Robert Woods will catch a bunch of touchdowns next season for Houston. That's a good thing for all the way around. I just think this is a great landing spot for Tank Dell as opposed to other places because he can learn from someone that was great at this job and to get on the field experience at the same time. Then you factor in the comfort of staying at home and all those kinds of things for a guy that needs some stability because of chaos of all the junior colleges moving around all the time. This is a great, great thing for this kid. And Tank Dell is going to be it's going to be so much fun to watch him play in Houston, right? He's just down the road, just energy. And that's just an awesome thing to see. Now, I think he had the best landing spot for any Houston Cougar. I really do. But he is not the only Houston Cougar that has a chance to make some noise if you believe me on this. But first, we do need to talk about something else you need to believe me on, and that is our buddies over at FanDuel. So it is time for grand slams, no hitters, double plays, because they're all back. There's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. I'm telling you, because I think you will win, the Astros are consistently starting to win. They're not getting sweeps. They're winning series. They play the Giants at home tomorrow. Or I guess today, as we're listening. Today, tomorrow, next day. They've got the Giants favored. Houston's coming off of an exciting weekend against Philadelphia at home. Getting to stay at home is nice. Garcia's on the mound. I'm taking the Astros. The over-under is set at 8.5 runs. And we know how things can leave the ballpark in the juice box. So I'm going to also go over the runs there. And I'm going to tell you to do it at FanDuel.com. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official sports partner of Major League Baseball. All right. So I mentioned that other Houston Cougars drafted could make some noise after this NFL draft. And my hat just fell down and hit a water ball on the way down. I'm just getting excited, I guess. But what I think part of the deal there to me is that, truthfully, Clayton Tune is built for a long-term NFL career. I told you guys about that on Friday. The everydayers like, yeah, I remember that. I remember that. Right. But on Friday, I said I think he's got a long-term career in the NFL because he's like a prototypical long-term backup. And I really do think that. And I think he'll be in a situation where he might get to fulfill that role in its entirety very, very quickly. So Tune was drafted to Arizona in the 5th round at pick 189 overall. Notable Arizona Cardinals starting quarterback is Kyler Murray. Now, I know people say, like, well, Parker, he's not going to take over the spot in front of Kyler. I mean, Kyler is a Texas high school football legend. Went 42-0 at in 6A football at Allen High School in the DFW area. Won state titles, all those kinds of things, right? He was #1 pick in 2019, and they brought in a new coach in Cliff Kingsbury to like build the whole thing around one Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray, for what it's worth, his dad was a college quarterback, and it's like one of those quarterback guru type trainers, and right? However, Kyler Murray has had just one winning season since getting to Arizona in 2019. He's kind of had both the dazzling rolling right, then rolling left, then throwing off his back hip and putting right on the numbers to DeAndre Hopkins in the end zone to win the game kind of touchdowns. He's had those. I'm not going to say he hasn't. But he's also had like these boneheaded, running around for his life when it's like you don't have that kind of time, sliding when you need to get that ball out of bounds, and like all those kinds of plays as well. And I think the truth is that Arizona's kind of weighing, is he the guy? How long-term can he be the guy for? How long-term can we wait for this? You saw that, I think, and work with me here, but last summer when they issued him a contract extension, the big thing that went public about it was not the dollar amount, not the year amount, but the clause about how many hours he was to be watching game film on official Arizona Cardinal devices. That way they could track it. Things went back and forth. Things got a little litigious, and they took the clause out. What I'm going to tell you for free is if you're really, really confident in your guy, you probably never put that clause in the first place, right? Like at the end of the day, that seems to tell me a lot about how the franchise feels about Kyler and potentially about some flaws they see in the system there. Now, I do not work with Kyler. I don't know what his film habits are. I don't know what I know he's also signed up for an esports team, and the jokes became very quickly that he's spending too much of his time playing too many video games and not enough time using his tablet to watch film. All I have from that are internet jokes. He does have an esports deal for what it's worth. What I do know is there will be zero of those concerns with one Clayton Tune. Zero. He is the work hardest of the work hard. He is the yes sirs of the yes sirs. He does things in the ways that you want your quarterback to be leading the way by example, right? He is just 6'2". He's not a giant. He doesn't have the 85-yard cannon of an arm, but he does things right and does things the right way. That's the guy you bring in behind Kyler to kind of push him like, hey, he's going to be doing the things the right way, right? So that is the first step of why this is a great fit for one Clayton Tune. He is coming in behind Kyler, and he's going to be leading by example, even if Kyler's the one on the field, right? Like that much I am very confident in. The second thing I want to say about this too is that the current backup for one Kyler Murray is a guy named Colt McCoy from UT Austin. Now, I think that's the perfect iconic vet. Not quite the win-loss record that I would have wanted, but the kind of guy that I think Clayton Tune can see and be like, oh man, that's exactly the way I can have my career go so long, is because Colt McCoy is an adequate guy in the field, if not better, right? There's been situations he's looked good, situations he's looked like, oh, we need a real start or whatever, but he has played for the better part of a decade and a half in the NFL as a consistent backup that if someone breaks a shoelace, you can put in there for a few drives or a couple games if you have to, right? He's a career 62% completions. He's very much middle of the road at 34 touchdowns and 32 picks, right? You typically, with 34 touchdowns, you'd probably want something more like 15 or 16 picks. And I mean, if you got down to 10, that'd be great, right? But catch my drift. Colt McCoy is a great veteran at that job, and that job that I think Clayton Tune could have locked down for the next 15 years. And Colt McCoy is 37. He's not going to do this forever, right? He's 6'1", 215, and had a major shoulder injury, or a couple, in college. Like, he's not going to do this forever by any stretch. And Clayton Tune is going to step into his shoes in a lot of ways, and going to be that next guy that you see bounce around the league a couple different places, because people love having him in the locker room, right? Just like they love having Colt McCoy in the locker room. Guys love playing with Clayton, just like guys love playing with Colt. Like, they have the same kind of energies in a lot of ways. And Clayton's actually a little bit bigger, stronger, faster across the board. And so, like, I could see him maybe sticking even longer and maybe be even more successful in those stints that he gets to start in. Because, again, people look at Colt and think about the reason he's not a starter is because he's like 11-25. And they forget that 15 of those losses were while he was a starter in Cleveland when they were just bad. But I digress. So I think that that's a good guy for Clayton to learn from, kind of like Tank is going to learn some from Robert Woods. But they both, Clayton and Colt, ought to be pushing Kyler, if not out, in the right direction. And certainly I could see them, if the franchise gets frustrated with Kyler, I could see this being the kind of thing that, okay, we just got to cut ties here. Kyler Murray's contract that he signed, the extension I mentioned, is through 2028, but there isn't out after 2027. And so theoretically, things could start to get ugly in 2026, right? Like that's kind of the timeline here. And along the way there, knock on wood, I guess someone could prove me wrong. I don't think Clayton Tune is going to do anything wrong where he doesn't have that backup job. I just don't. He's a great backup quarterback in his demeanor, his approach, his work ethic, etc. And he can fight for starting snaps. As far as the other parts of this offense go that make sense to me, the new head coach in Arizona that replaced Cliff Kingsbury is a defensive guy. And so that worries me a little bit because I would like an offensive head coach for my offensive players, and right, if I'm being selfish. But the new offensive coordinator is another one of these young guys. He's 36 years old. He was the quarterback and tight end coach for the last few seasons in Cleveland, and then was an assistant in Minnesota. I say it to say that in Cleveland with Colt, or in Minnesota with one Case Keenum, who I think is a great comp as well for what I think Clayton Tune's career could be like, not just because they're both Cougars. He sees the value of those guys, right? He saw what having, I guess, just last season, a guy like Jacoby Brissett, right? Those kinds of guys, he sees what kind of value having the right kind of people as your backup quarterbacks can do for your offense and for your locker room and for your system. And then you have that like weird time in Minnesota where like, oh, and then Case Keenum just has to start in the major playoff game and have one of the best like postseason runs of anyone in Minnesota playoff history, right? Like those kinds of things can happen too. But I think that like that experience for him as a young assistant coach in his first year as an offense coordinator, his first stint as an offensive coordinator, will go a long way. And so I think that that kind of meshes well for one Clayton Tune as well. I think it's a great spot for him, even though you look at it like, oh man, they've got their starter for a long time in Kyler. I think there's more to it than that. And that's why I actually really like, for a guy to go in the fifth round like Clayton did, I really, really like where he landed. He is not the only Houston Cougar that landed. He and Tank Dell are not the only two. Like I said, this was the most Houston Cougars draft in the NFL since 1997. So let's get into in the third segment where the rest of the guys went. All right, so in this third segment, it's worth pointing out in a single segment covering all four of these guys, or all however many of these guys, because I did the undrafted free, it's going to be a lot. So it's going to be just like very rapid fire bullet point kind of stuff. But I couldn't not mention Derek Parish because Derek Parish was such a fun Cougar to watch while on campus in the third ward. He got drafted in the 7th round, pick number 240 to Jacksonville. He's switching officially to fullback, although I could read that more like a, H-back or a second tight end or just a football player. And I think Houston's football Twitter put out as much, that FB really just might mean football player. He's the only fullback on the roster for what it's worth, even after all the undrafteds and all that kind of stuff in Jacksonville. The second tight end they've got was a 2nd-round pick this year, and so I'd imagine that like the second true tight end might be a hard spot to make, but being the only fullback, I would think, is a good thing. For what it's worth, their first tight end in Jacksonville is Evan Ingram. If they wanted to go more into the run game there in Jacksonville, Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby are two great running backs that he could be the fullback blocking for in split zone kind of systems. They kind of ran split zones with the second tight end last year, and that's why maybe I'm thinking he'll be a second tight end blocking type guy. He showed great hands and speed in his pro day kind of stuff, but I digress. I will say, though, if he's more of a blocking back or even a blocking tight end, the pass blocking aspect may be huge because the passing game there in Jacksonville, they got Calvin Ridley coming back, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, some great talented wideouts there in Jacksonville. And obviously, Trevor Lawrence, being the guy throwing the ball around, is a big, big part of that as well. All of that to say, though, that if he can continue to make his spot earned, and I think we both know that Derek will work, like he's a crazy hard work ethic guy. He's got, 6'2", 240 rocked up, no extra body fat on his body because of how much work he puts into himself. I'm confident that if they really do want a fullback type guy on their roster, and they may, that they're gonna find some spot from on the field somewhere at some time. The fun part about this for Derek is there's a chance Jacksonville's pretty good, right? Like, playoff game last year went as it did, and all that stuff. But like, Trevor Lawrence looks to be the part that we think he will be. Like we just mentioned, they're bringing in wide receivers. This offense could be a fun thing to be a part of. And while we think of Derek Parish as this like great pass rusher, that same tenacity and getting after it to help free up those guys that we just mentioned as the skill positions could be tremendous. And I really, really like that spot for him because I want to see him do well on a team that does well. And if he's going to make this transition to offense, I think that offense has a shot. Another guy was Gervarrious Owens. Gervarrious Owens went in the 7th round to New York Giants at 254 overall. For what it's worth, the New York Giants are building their defense for the last handful of drafts, looks like, with primarily some up-front guys. I mean, Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, Kayvon Thibodeau, etc., right? They did draft a corner in round 1, so I don't think they'll slide Gervarrious to a corner, although I don't know that because they have Adari Jackson, the other corner. I like their free safety, Xavier McKinney, so I don't know if he'll slide in this free safety spot. But there are jobs to be earned at the strong safety, nickel guy. Currently, that's like Bob McClain and Darnay Holmes. Those are spots that are workable and can earn some work in. Also worth pointing out that, like, being a 7th-round pick, I'd imagine the GM has some say in favoritism there. But we'll see. As opposed to undrafted guys. I say to say that I think that there's jobs to be had in the back half of New York's defense. And it's not an awful situation to get drafted into. They have a couple guys that are going to make it on the field that like a stars that like are not question marks, but they have some guys that really are question marks. So up and down for how that goes for Gervarrious. I will say, obviously, I hope he sticks. So I don't mean that to be negative or whatever, but I just don't know. Then after Gervarrious, we got out of the draft and very quickly started seeing people talking about on Twitter that a handful of Houston Cougars were also pulling an interest in the undrafted free agent market. Now, I've heard both ways in this, but the agents will tell you that it's actually better to be an undrafted free agent than to be a 7th-round pick, because if you get multiple options, you can pick the situation that actually may serve you the best. And I think that goes a couple different ways. One, like Christian Trahan, as an example, Houston Cougar tight end, about finding a spot where that may be exactly the right move, right? So Christian Trahan signs undrafted free agent with Cincinnati. Cincinnati has a lot of turnover happening and flipping around happening at the tight end position. Irv Smith Jr. looks like he may be the starter, but Drew Sample and Devin Asasi, those guys are the guys that, like, do they make the roster? Does someone get cut? Who gets cut? Christian Trahan is not out of size. Like, as far as they don't have any like 6'7", 6'8" type guys running through there either. Like, this is a spot where he can get on the field potentially. He can certainly has a really good shot of making the roster. They have a great young quarterback in Joe Burrow. And frankly, the thing that helps Trahan out is he's going to be signing a rookie deal while they're trying to find ways to cut money to help sign their big name skill position guys like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and so on, right? So suddenly Christian Trahan and a rookie deal sound a little bit better than some of the other guys. And I think that's the kind of calculus they have to do in these undrafted free agency spots. And not just a team where he fits on the field, because I think Trahan does there too, but a spot where he really may get in on the field. Inverse of that, Art Green signing an undrafted deal to Denver makes me feel like, ooh, I don't know how many options he had, unfortunately, because I don't know that was the best spot for a corner looking to make a roster goes. Now, admittedly, I'm looking at their starting lineup. Patrick Surtain II, they spent a third-round pick on a kid named Riley Moss this year, and Damari Mathis was a nickel-type guy last. Those guys, I feel like, are all on the roster starting. The backups behind that, what I may not know that Green and his agent have more insight on, maybe he can work his way into the roster in those senses. Like, maybe those aren't set in stone. But Art Green is going to be in Denver, at least trying to make the squad, and I think we'll know a lot more in a couple months. But initially, it looks like a spot that kind of has like a backlog at corner, and so I don't know what he knows about the back end of that. We hope that he makes the roster in there, obviously. I think that's exactly what's going to happen to Donovan Mooten, who signed his undrafted free agency deal at Indianapolis with the Colts. They have Shaquille Leonard as their starting Mike linebacker. I think Donovan has to at least start off trying to play the Mike linebacker spot. He's a little undersized for that, but a little plays more like a Mike linebacker. So the edge kind of linebacker stuff's a little bit harder. But after Shaquille Leonard, their roster looks really, really thin at Mike linebacker there in Indianapolis. And so I can see why that is appealing to Donovan, because he can go make on the roster and trying to work his way in, right? Kind of the same way I see it for DeAnthony Jones, who signed as an undrafted free agent with Chicago. Chicago we think of as like, a young up-and-coming team, right? They just got their quarterback, Justin Fields, and they're moving things in the right direction, and NFC North looks open, right, et cetera. But in a league where you kind of need 6 or 7 pass rushers, there are just 5 defensive ends on the roster in Chicago. And so while some people, makeshift and pull in outside linebackers and rotational guys, that's fine. But positionally, that's a spot that has some room for DeAnthony Jones. I think it was a great move for DeAnthony to go sign with them because of that. I love watching DeAnthony at Houston, and so I think he should have been drafted, frankly, as a late 7th-round pick, if not higher. But that he got to pick a situation where he can find his way on the field potentially, because, again, in a room where you're hoping to have 6 or 7 or maybe even 8 bodies, they've got 5. Great spot for him. And frankly, again, on a team that may have a shot to win the NFC North. And that's a great, great job and a great, hopefully landing spot for one DeAnthony Jones. Now, all kinds of stuff could happen the next couple days. By the time you listen to this on Monday afternoon, you could have had more guys sign undrafted free agent deals, or who knows. Find me on Twitter at Painsworth512, PAINSWRTH512, to talk all things Cougs. We got a busy week ahead of us. We'll be talking more about the Big 12. We got to talk about something about this baseball team, because they are absolutely killing it right now. Basketball transfer portal. Basketball has not filled that last spot, and it's kind of counting down the days to when they can. Right, all kinds of fun stuff happening across Houston's campus. Make sure you follow us each and every day to bring the latest on the Houston Cougars each day. We appreciate you making us your first listen today here at Locked On Cougs. For a second listen, because we talked about it all day long, I'm going to recommend going on and listening to Locked On NFL Draft. They did a whole mock first round with all the hosts from the NFL channels. They did all kinds of coverage throughout the weekend. They're wrapping it up throughout this week. So make sure you check them out. That's all stuff NFL Draft each and every day over at Locked On NFL Draft. Thank you all so much for listening to Locked On Cougs this morning. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.